Hello, my lovely Patreon family, and thank you so much for tuning in to this month's Patreon video podcast. It is November 2018. I hope you all had an awesome Thanksgiving break. Mine was great. I stuffed my face for 3 days without stopping. My fiance and I went to Vancouver, BC, and had a lot of Asian food, which I know isn't very Thanksgiving-y, but we carried the tradition by eating until we were no longer able to eat anymore. So I hope you all got to enjoy time with your families, enjoy time, eating yummy food, and it's great to be back to work actually. So in this month's podcast, I'm going to go ahead and start answering your questions as fast as I can because there's actually several more than I anticipated, so I'm gonna try my best. Here we go. First up, we have some questions from Savannah. She says, "Hello, I was wondering if you could explain how taxes work as a self-employed artist. It seems like a very scary subject that I'd like to learn more about." And she also asks, how many prints can you make from one set of ink? And how do you get better at being patient with your art? Whenever I paint, I have a set idea of how I want it to turn out, and I get impatient when it doesn't immediately turn out that way. Do you have that same struggle / any advice for me as to how to deal with that? Thank you. You're very welcome, Savannah. So the first question about taxes, honestly, I am not super knowledgeable on that front. I hire an accountant every year to help me do my taxes. And since I'm not well versed in finances and accounting by any means, I feel hesitant giving out like solid advice because I don't ever want to give out the wrong information accidentally. But what I can tell you is that I make sure to keep track of all of my expenses and all of my income. So when you're self-employed, it's not the same tax protocol as someone who's employed by a company, but a huge part of saving on taxes as someone who's self-employed is to make sure to deduct all of your job-related expenses. So art supplies for me, the monthly fees I pay to host my website and to use, Adobe Photoshop software, gas money if I'm driving to the art store or driving to a gallery show, so many different types of expenses, and most of them can be deducted because they're related to your business. So I keep a spreadsheet of any expenses I made, including the date and, where I purchased the item and how much I spent. And I also take photos of all of my receipts. And then at the end of the year, I kind of hand all of this over to my accountant, who then balances it against my income. My income is a little bit more straightforward because I do everything online. So if you have like a Squarespace and you host your shop there, they use this service called Stripe. And you can also use PayPal, which are two of the most popular ways to accept payments online. And at the end of the year, those services will send you a tax form that details like all the earnings you made. And I send all those forms to my accountant along with my spreadsheet of expenses, and she does the magic for me. But the one tip I will give you about taxes is make sure to keep track of those expenses, and make sure to keep track of not just the expenses, but all of your forms that you get from companies that you work with or platforms that you use to collect payment. Save all the forms you can possibly save. It's better to err on the side of caution. So yeah, I'd rather oversave than undersave all those documents and receipts and expenses. And then lastly, I will say that I think it is a worthy investment to hire a professional accountant, not only to help me do my taxes, but also to educate me on things I could be missing out on or things I could be doing incorrectly. And yeah, that's kind of all I know about taxes. I'm sorry I wasn't able to provide more informative tips. But your question about how many prints can you make from one set of ink, that's kind of difficult for me to answer because different ink colors get used up at different rates. So for me, like the blues and the grays and the pinks get used up really fast, but the yellows and reds tend to last pretty long. And I think that correlates to the colors that are most commonly present in my artwork. But if I were to kind of, I guess, just make a guess or an estimate, I would say my current printer, a Canon Pro 1000, can probably generate maybe 100 prints per tank. Of course, during that process, I might have had to switch out one color 3 times and another color only 1 time. But I would say around probably 100 small prints. This actually is very different from my old printer, which was the Canon Pro 10, and the ink tanks were a lot smaller in size. Both printers use, I think, 10 to 11 ink tanks. So there's like 10 to 11 individual colors, and each color comes in containers. So my current printer, each container is 60 milliliters, and my old printer, each container was only 14 milliliters. So in my old printer, you have to switch out the ink tanks way more. I think like a full set would probably print me, if I recall correctly, like 20 to 30 prints. But the ink also didn't cost as much. So it's a smaller tank, but it's a lower price. I actually think like the price per milliliter is actually a better deal on the larger printer. But like a complete new set of all 11 or 12 inks would probably cost like close to $1,000. Whereas in the older printer, you could get a complete tank refill for under $200. I think it was about like $140, $150. So definitely less daunting to buy, but you have to switch them out more often. So I definitely prefer my new printer because each ink tank lasts me a long way and I don't have to replace them as often. And like I said, the price per milliliter is actually slightly better and the quality is a lot better. It's a more advanced printer. And to answer your last question about how to get better at being patient with your art and to not immediately get frustrated or turn away when your current work in progress doesn't fit that vision in your head. I know that the common advice, and of course I want to just reiterate this, is to just kind of be at peace with the fact that art is never going to look satisfactory until the final stages right before it's complete. Even right now, when you look at my current work in progress on this video here, like when it's in a rough in-between stage, it's always going to be very far from that vision, that completed ideal painting that you had in your mind. So it's something that over time you just get used to and you can train yourself to get better at, like accepting that and not letting that discourage you. But one actual, I guess, helpful piece of advice that has worked for me is when the art is in that in-between stage, instead of always focusing on how it looks and how much progress it's making towards the final vision, I instead focus on the kind of tactile, meditative qualities of painting. So obviously, if I'm doing like a first layer like I am right now, the strokes are very rough, the colors, are very basic, there's not much detail or dimension, but I can focus on things like just the joy of spreading paint around a surface or the sound of my brush, or little things like I really actually enjoy cleaning my brush as well in my paint thinner and wiping it clean and mixing colors. So these are all things that, the painting doesn't have to look good for you to enjoy it. It's almost like I get to be a kid again, playing with paint and playing with creating. So when it's rough, I focus on the other enjoyable aspects, such as, the simple joy of creating art. And also, I feel like art is a very meditative experience. So when I don't have to worry about little details and I can kind of just play around and lay down the basic shapes, or even when I'm trying to take the painting from like the rough color blocking layer into a layer that looks, realistic, or that looks like it's finally becoming something. Even that process, although it's tedious, if you kind of let your mind lose itself and just kind of lose yourself completely in your painting and in your work, it's actually a really great form of meditation for me, and it helps kind of clear my mind of all the stresses of the day. It helps me forget everything except for the painting I'm working on right now. So I would say my advice for learning how to be patient is, to summarize, train yourself to kind of not let that gap between your current work in progress stage and the final vision in your head, not let that gap discourage you. It's like something that it's unavoidable. There's no way we can ever all paint something and have it look polished and pretty from beginning to end. There's always going to be long, rough in-between periods. So train yourself to just be adaptable to that reality, but also at the same time, find the little joys in painting that you can focus on to give yourself some energy and some positivity to carry you through those rough stages. And, again, those things include like enjoying the simple process of smearing paint on a surface, the process of mixing colors, and also the meditative quality that painting can give you, and letting your mind drift off and just kind of cleansing your entire soul of all of the stresses of life and just focusing on the painting in front of you. The next question is from Randolph, who asks, "Hello, Happy. Do you have any techniques on how to stop and prevent art block? I felt so uninspired to do art lately because of art block. Thank you for your input, and I hope your advice works out." Well, first of all, you're welcome for my input. I hope it's useful. So I always look at art block as an analogy for going to the gym. I think they're very similar. If you establish a healthy routine, like gym is something that I struggle with a lot because it's not something I do frequently and I haven't baked it into my everyday routine. So going to the gym feels like a huge burden. It feels like a huge wrench in my day. I have to really make time for it, set aside other important things to do it. And then, I'm kind of dreading going because it's going to be really tiring. I'm going to be sore. I'm going to be out of breath. But then once you get there, and let's say you're taking a class or completing a workout, once you're on that treadmill or in that class, it's actually quite easy to carry yourself through. And the hardest part about going to the gym, I think a lot of people say this, I hear this a lot with my fitness friends. They always say the hardest part about going to the gym is putting on your shoes and leaving your house. Because once you get there and you're in that environment and you're kind of, in the middle of a workout and you have a sweat going, your heart rate is up and your endorphins are being released, then it's actually quite easy. It's not as bad as you think. And I always feel the same way about art. I feel like when you're sitting there and you haven't, gotten used to creating art every day, there's a whole separate protocol for professional artists who have to do it every day because you have external deadlines to force you to create art. So you really can't afford to have art block. You just have to push through it because you have other people relying on you. But if you're doing art as a hobby or you don't have other people waiting on your art, that self-motivation is very similar to going to the gym. The hardest part is just beginning the process of creating. I remember when I was doing it as a hobby, I would often just stare at a blank sheet of paper or like a blank canvas and feel so much intimidation, about how am I going to get this completely blank starting point into a finished work of art. And I would think about all the other times that I started a piece and it didn't work out, or I started a piece and it took me days and weeks and months to finish. And I would let those scary thoughts, allow my hands to just freeze. Like I was too scared to even start. And then I just gave up and decided to watch TV or do something else. I think that is very similar to when I think about the gym. I always think about like how hard it is going to feel like when I'm in the middle of a workout, my muscles are sore and everything burns. But in reality, if you just get into a habit of creating, or if you just get yourself to start creating and, hold yourself accountable and say, I'm not going to stop until I finish, or I'm not going to stop until it's been 2 hours or however much time you have. If you just force yourself to do it, sure, the result might not always be perfect, but you're establishing good habits. You're training yourself to get over that fear of just, taking that leap and beginning. And also you're training yourself to, practice art every day or every time you have free time. And the more often you do it, the less scary it'll get and the less art block you'll feel because you're more used to it. You're used to kind of setting aside time in your day for art. When it becomes a part of your routine, it's less strange and less scary because it's something very familiar. And B, of course everyone says this, but the more you practice, the better you get. So there's less things to discourage you. Instead of always remembering times when things went wrong or your pieces, looked bad and you didn't like it, you'll start to be able to create pieces that you're proud of and start to experience more things that go right, more little successes instead of failures. So I would say treat art block like going to the gym, and treat making art as something that's like crucial for your health. I know like making art isn't like the same as working out in terms of health for your body, but think of it as like a workout for your mind, for your spirit. It's very nurturing. It's definitely a great habit or a great hobby to have, in my opinion. And so if you are worried about creating a piece of art that doesn't look good and you're discouraged, treat art as just like a healthy lifestyle choice that you want to bake into your everyday habits, and really hold yourself accountable in creating art, even when you don't have that motivation to create something amazing. Just do it for the sake of prolonging that habit. Like, I think, even if you go to the gym and you don't work out and even if you go to the gym and you don't do an exceptional workout and like push yourself to your limit and just, sweat and like, do something super intense, if you just go and even walk on the treadmill for an hour, that's better than sitting on your butt and not doing anything, right? Art is the same way. Even if you don't create something amazing, or even if you mess up and, you backtrack, that is still a part of the practicing process. It's still a part of the way you can improve and learn. So just do it for the sake of doing art. Don't put too much pressure on it, and don't let the art block deter you from just enjoying, an hour or even 30 minutes creating art in your spare time just for fun. So yeah, I hope that helps. The next question is from Helene, who says, "Hi Happy, I'm always struggling with portraits/faces. Do you have any tips for me how to build up the face features? I love the dreamy and doll-like features you give your mermaid girls. Thanks." Well, thank you so much. So faces are, I could make several videos about them, and I should definitely create a more comprehensive tutorial for you guys on Patreon on how I not just paint faces, but how I kind of come up with the character styles. I would say that it's important to start off with the basics and start off with realistic anatomy and realistic proportions. I think it was Picasso who once said, learn the rules first so then you can know how to break them later as an artist. So learn the rules and master the rules, and then when you've mastered them, you can break the rules in your own way. And I always say this because I feel like so much of what makes these exaggerated, dreamy, doll-like characters look so believable and so, I guess, aesthetically pleasing is because they have an undertone of like normal, realistic anatomy. And what I mean by that is, even if you have like a character who has unrealistic proportions, like especially for mine, my characters always have huge foreheads, eyes super wide apart, really tiny little button noses and mouths, and very exaggerated, like, very narrow shoulders, really long necks. Obviously, I don't think I've mastered it yet, so by no means am I saying that I know the best and I'm like so good at this. Like, I still have a lot to learn and a lot to improve on every day. But what I noticed that throughout my art journey was when I practiced realistic proportions, it really helped give me the foundation and confidence to start creating my own stylized characters. Versus if I started without knowing any basic anatomy, I wouldn't know how to exaggerate things to make them look believable or to make them look lifelike. I don't think something has to be photorealistic for it to look believable or lifelike. Pixar movies are a great example of that. All the Pixar characters, especially in their 3D animated films, are very exaggerated, very cartoony, and they also move in a way that's it's not super realistic. Like the way the characters move, they have like a motion arc, if you will. But they're all exaggerated on purpose and with the right intent, and exaggerated with the right kind of expertise, so that you feel completely immersed in their world and you don't ever question it. You don't ever feel like, this animated film feels kind of fake and plasticky and, like even when you're in a world full of cartoon characters or talking animals, you still feel like it's believable in that story's universe. And your paintings and artworks, I feel like, are very similar. When you exaggerate things, you have to know what to exaggerate and how to exaggerate them to still keep your audience immersed in your world, in your universe. So with faces, once you know the realistic proportions, and not just proportions, but like where the muscles are, where what the bone structure does, like where there's usually shadows, where there are highlights based on the light source. Once you practice enough of those, then you can start kind of tweaking little things and still kind of tweaking it with intent. So if I want to make my eyes super wide apart, I have to also think about how the skull of this character would look. If I have super wide apart eyes, I have super wide apart eye sockets. If I have a super large forehead, I have to know exactly how the forehead bone will be shaped when I make that elongation. If I want a really small chin, a really small nose, I have to also know like how the shadow cast on the nose on the face, or cast by the nose on the face, will look like. So these little things are only things you can pick up with enough practice. And I know like it's really, really annoying sometimes, because every time people ask artists for advice, they always go back to practicing. And it's kind of like beating a dead horse at this point, because it's like, well, obviously, duh, we all know we have to practice. That goes without saying. But I really do think practicing realistic proportions and realistic anatomy will help you create your characters way more easily. If you start off just doing cartoons and not learning the fundamentals, like I did when I was in middle school, I would only copy from manga or anime, which, was really fun, but also the manga and anime artists that I was copying from, they had the fundamental skills. They knew exactly how to create each pose of each character, how to angle the faces depending on like the different positions of the head and the camera angle. They had all those down, and they were able to create these beautiful manga worlds. But for me, all I did was I didn't trace, but I would like copy them one to one. And I wouldn't think about like, oh, why is the elbow bent this way? Or why does the chin look, wider when, I change the perspective of the camera? I didn't understand all those things. Instead, I just copied almost like a robot. And without those fundamental skills, I was really struggling to create my own characters. So it wasn't until I practiced a lot and did a lot of studies with realistic, whether it was from realistic photos or from real life people, or just following tutorials from these amazing art educators you can find online. It wasn't until then that I started actually feeling comfortable creating my own unique characters and building up the kind of dreamy doll-like features on my faces. The next question is from Luz Tapia. It's actually very similar to the previous couple of questions I answered. Luz asks, do you have days where you hate/don't like anything you do with your art? I have a really huge motivation and urge to paint and draw, but I end up hating everything that I do recently. If you did as well, do you have any advice on how to avoid this or to make it better? The struggle is very real with this. Okay, so I'm going to try my best not to be redundant because, since these podcasts are very raw, they're not edited, I tend to ramble on, and sometimes I know I tend to repeat myself. Thank you guys for always putting up with me and my ramblings. But to reiterate what I said before quickly, yes, I definitely do have days, pretty much on a daily basis, I end up hating, struggling, stressing, feeling, very hard on myself and not being satisfied with what I paint. And this is something that like all the artists that you guys think are flawless, or all the artists you look up to, and the same with artists I look up to, even though they're at a skill level that I myself would think, wow, like I would, if I could paint as well as they did, then I would be set. Like I would think I was perfect and just be completely satisfied and happy with myself all the time. But that's not true. The more you practice, the more you get better, the higher your standards become. So something that might have made you feel completely satisfied and feel like a finished, ready to go piece of work in the past might not give you that same feeling after you've practiced and improved for a few years. So the better you get, the harder you are on yourself and the higher your standards are. So artists are always kind of chasing that feeling of satisfaction and being happy with your art. And, you know, in some ways it's a blessing and a curse. You know, it's a blessing because you'll always hold yourself to a higher standard. You're always pushing yourself to learn and improve. I don't think you ever stop learning and improving with art. Even, you know, those old masters who are like 80 and have been painting their whole lives, there's always something new that they can train themselves to do better at. And so you have to just kind of, you know, be at peace with that reality. It's kind of like what I said before about when I answered the question about how do you feel when, you know, you're discouraged from kind of the rough in-between stages of your art looking ugly and not what you want it to look like in your head. You just kind of have to train yourself to accept that this is part of the creating process. You'll never be completely happy with your artwork 100% of the time in 100% of the stages. In the beginning stages, you'll always feel the sense of like, ooh, it doesn't look quite how I want it. It's not really, you know, am I really going to get there? Is it really going to end up working out and, you know, kind of fitting all together in the end to create that final masterpiece that I had envisioned? You'll always have that doubt. But, you know, if you're really having a down day and hating what you're doing, I would say, like, don't force yourself to make a masterpiece. It's kind of like what my advice about art block. Like, do art for the sake of having fun, for the sake of just practicing, for the sake of maybe meditating and just enjoying the simple process of creating. You know, listen to the sounds of your pencil, practice, you know, kind of blending, practice smearing paint on a canvas. Don't put too much pressure on the art itself, but instead focus on the process of creating art. Because whether the art is good or bad, the process stays fairly the same. As long as you enjoy the process, it doesn't really matter what stage your art is in or if you hate it or not. You know, I try to look at art as like therapy, as a form of meditation. And so even if there are days where I hate the art I created or I messed up or I didn't mix the right colors, I can still find joy in the peace and the kind of harmony that art brings me and brings my mind. So yeah, if you're struggling with, you know, hating your art or having art block or, you know, not being happy with your in-between stages, just focus on the process of creating rather than the end result of what you created. Next up, we have a question from Mayara, who kindly actually told me how her name is pronounced, so thank you so much. I always feel so bad if I mispronounce your names. Mayara, you have a beautiful name. Mayara asks, I've been preparing myself to put up a shop for a year now, but I still can't bring myself to do it. How would you deal with this fear of failure? I freeze every time. Also, I'm curious, if you had to work with only 4 colors, what would they be? So the shop question, yeah, it's really intimidating to put up a shop, especially when not a lot of people are ordering from your shop. You almost feel like this embarrassment of putting yourself out there and everyone is kind of ignoring you or rejecting you. I definitely know that fear. And even to this day, you know, my shop doesn't do, it's not like it always gets better. It's always going up, up, up. You know, there are days when I have, or days or months, I have worse sales than I did before where, you know, my numbers decline, and it's always discouraging to, you know, kind of attach money and your financial well-being to your art. It almost kind of puts an extra layer of unneeded stress. It makes you feel like you're creating art for the wrong reasons. So yeah, having a shop is very stressful, and I totally understand your fear. But I would say, like, don't put too much pressure on your shop to do well immediately. Just know that a lot of people out there, even though they support your art and support your work, they don't necessarily have the money to support you financially. And it doesn't mean that you're failing as an artist. It doesn't mean that your art isn't being loved. It doesn't mean that you're not doing, you know, a good job of inspiring people and connecting with your community. And even people who do buy your art, it's not like they can keep buying it every single month. Art is not like a consumable good. It's not like, toilet paper or cereal or shampoo. It's not something people have to constantly buy over and over again. It's kind of more like a collector's item. So even if someone does support your work, they might buy 1 or 2 or even 10 pieces and then run out of space on their walls to keep purchasing things. So don't be discouraged by, your shop maybe not performing well in the beginning or not performing well later on compared to previous months. I think that's just a part of the game. It's better to adopt the mindset of just being grateful for any sale, even if you just make 1 sale a year. Like, that means you've reached one person enough that they were willing to spend their hard-earned money to, bring your art into their homes. Like, that's a wonderful thing. So don't put too much pressure on your shop to do well. Don't put too much pressure on people to constantly spend money on your things, and don't take it personally, and don't be too hard on yourself, if your shop isn't making enough sales. And I think if you come in with that mindset, then, opening a shop isn't super intimidating. There's several websites you can use. There's like Squarespace, there's Etsy, there's Shopify, there's Big Cartel. There's so many of these platforms that make the technical part of setting up a shop very easy. They kind of do all the hard work for you, and all you have to do is fill in the blanks. So I wish you the best of luck in creating your shop, and I hope it goes well. And if I could only pick 4 colors to work with, that's really tough. I'm not going to count black and white because I feel like they're not really colors. So black and white aside, I would have to say one of the colors would definitely be Prussian blue, which is like my favorite shade of blue, and I use it for dark night skies. And you can also mix it with white to create beautiful light shades of blue. It's like very rich and slightly warmer shade of blue. Also probably quinacridone opera, which is this brilliant magenta bright pink. It's made by Holbein. I also love cadmium red medium because you can mix it with many greens, you can mix it with pinks. It just creates a beautiful rich red that brings like an earthiness quality to any sort of subject you paint. And also, okay, so I did blue, red, magenta, and I guess the last one would probably be yellow, so that I could mix the yellow with the blue to create a green that I can then mix with the red to create flesh tones. And then I can also mix the yellow with the red to create oranges, and I can mix the yellow with even black to create like a very earthy brownish green. So Prussian blue, cadmium red medium, cadmium yellow medium, and quinacridone opera would be my 4 colors. Next is a question from Indira, who says, I was wondering if you had any tips on creating art when you struggle or have in the past struggled with mental illness like depression or anxiety. Sometimes when I create art, I want to use those emotions to create a piece, but I find I am almost encouraging those feelings in the process. Wow, this is a really good question. I haven't ever answered this before, and I'm going to try to answer the best I can from like a neutral point of view, because I don't ever want to push my own opinions or agenda on other people. I know everyone deals with life and their personal experiences differently. But from my personal point of view, I don't think that by, using your struggles or demons or your, any sort of negativity in your past or present, I don't think working that into your art or using that as inspiration for your art encourages those feelings in any way. I often found myself, and still to this day find myself, turning to art as a relief or as an outlet for any sort of negative feelings, whether it be anxiety, stress, depression, hopelessness, self-doubt. I don't necessarily like work those exact themes literally into my work. Like if I'm feeling really sad, I'm not like literally painting a crying girl, but I do definitely unleash all those emotions while I paint. And sometimes, I like to create more vague metaphors. So if I'm heartbroken or really stressed or down, instead of painting things that look very obviously sad, maybe I'll paint something by using more toned down, sadder colors. Or maybe if I'm feeling lonely, I'll paint a girl kind of by herself in a big, vast scenery, but I won't actually, bake in like someone physically crying or physically being hurt. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think every artist has their own unique ways of portraying their feelings in a visual manner. So whatever feels comfortable and natural to you, I would encourage you to definitely, relate your art to your feelings, because art is such a great form of therapy. I know I've mentioned it several times in this podcast already, but you don't ever have to feel like you have to hide yourself in your work, because I personally feel like art is the best way for artists to express themselves and to connect with the world. And even if you're not doing it literally, it's still a good way for you to kind of almost have a secret diary of your feelings, a secret visual diary of your feelings. So please don't ever feel like you should censor yourself and avoid using your own emotions in your creative process. I would actually encourage it, and I hope everything goes well. Next, we have a question from Jessica, who says, I was wondering if you recommend getting a copyright for artwork or your artist name / brand before starting a website. Did you have to do the same? So I honestly don't know a lot about this topic, and I don't feel like I should be giving advice because I haven't looked into it very much. But definitely, if you are wanting to copyright your artist name or your brand, that's something that I would encourage you to do. It's something I myself have been looking into doing. Obviously I can't copyright the name Happy because it's a very common word, but yeah, I think a lot of times when you share things on social media or online, you're at the mercy of the anonymous World Wide Web, and it's definitely a good idea to protect yourself. In terms of how to do it, I honestly don't know, but I will actually look into that because I have been thinking about doing that more for my own art business, and once I find out, I will definitely report back with results. But I would suggest Googling it, looking up some advice from art blogs or from legal blogs. I found a lot of things out by just simply Googling it. Sorry I couldn't be more help here, but I will definitely look into this matter more so I can give you guys better advice in the near future. And the last question today is from Natalie, who is trying out oils for the first time and says, should I buy many student grade paints like Gamblin 1980? Or is it better to start only with primary colors of artist grade paint? And how long will a tube of 37 milliliters last in oils? Okay, so first of all, 37 milliliters is like kind of the most common size. It's just the small handheld oil paint tubes. Those last a really long time, especially if you're frugal like me and you only squeeze out enough oil paint that you actually need to use. I don't ever squeeze out like a huge dollop of paint because I'm always afraid that it'll dry up before I get a chance to use it. So I'm very, very frugal and careful with my paint. I don't ever waste it. I make sure to seal the cap on tight. And my paint, I've had tubes last me like 4 to 5 years. So depending on the color and the colors you like to work with, I would say don't worry. They definitely last at least a year. They last a really, really long time. In terms of if you're just starting out, I would actually recommend going with the student grade paints because the artist grade is really, really expensive. It can be really tough on your budget. And a lot of student grade paints like Gamblin 1980, the quality is actually really nice. And I've painted pieces back in the day with student grade paints, and they still look the same as they've done. Like oil paints preserve very well, and as long as you varnish them and keep them away from direct sunlight, there's nothing wrong with student grade paints. I would say still stick with good brands such as Gamblin 1980. Don't like go to Walmart and buy the crappy student grade paints. Still like go to an art store and get student grade paints from brands that an art store would carry. But yeah, also there's nothing wrong with investing in a few tubes of artist grade paint. Like cadmium yellow medium is one I realized like the artist grade and the student grade had a huge difference in quality, and the artist grade was so much better. So for the few colors that you really like or that you're going to use a lot, there's nothing wrong with getting one more expensive tube of paint and kind of splurging and treating yourself, if you will. But yeah, that about wraps up today's podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening to me ramble for this long, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. Have a wonderful holiday season. I can't wait to see you guys next month. You guys are the best patrons a girl could ask for, and I'll catch you later. Bye.